Hi, my name is Frank Schaefer, and I'm a writer and a painter, and sometime political commentator. One of the odder journeys I took in my own life, because I never served in the U.S. military, was the fact that when my son volunteered for the United States Marine Corps back in the days when Bill Clinton was still president, and then George Bush became president, and a few days into his own presidency, we were attacked in 9/11. As a writer, I began to write about the experience of being the father of a Marine in wartime. And I wrote a book called Keeping Faith, a father-son story about love in the United States Marine Corps, which I co-authored with my son, John. And after Oprah interviewed me, and we had been on 2020 on ABC, a lot of media coverage, the book became a bestseller. And I penned a few opinion pieces for the Washington Post at that time, one called My Heart on the Line, which went viral and still gets circulated, about what it's like to be the proud father of someone serving in the military and all the anxiety that goes with that. And as a result, I got a handwritten note from General Jones, who became Commandant of the Marine Corps and then Chief of NATO for a while. I got a handwritten note from George W. Bush thanking me for the book and saying that his mom had told him to read it, and one from Barbara Bush and Bush Sr. And what was odd about this is the book was non-political. It was simply about the fact that I had gained so much respect for the choice my son made right out of high school. And by the way, he survived several combat tours in Afghanistan and one in Iraq. Thank God, is the father to 3 of my 5 grandchildren today, and doing well. And after he got out of the Marine Corps, he went to the University of Chicago, did very well there, graduated, got married, had children, and so forth. But this little detour in my life as someone who had not served in the military meant that I had a lot of contact with people in the Marine Corps, but also the military in general. I was invited to speak as a military parent at various gatherings and functions. I met generals. I believe I met General Kelly at one point at one of these functions. I was a guest of honor at 8th and I, the Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. for their parade. I sat next to the Secretary of Defense. It was insane, because I come from not only an evangelical right-wing background, but I have left that background. I'm certainly of the left these days politically. And I was writing as a liberal who was surprised that his son had served in the Marine Corps, and learning to respect that choice, even though politically I was against not just the decision to go to war in Iraq, but did my best to not have George W. Bush elected at all. So it was a very odd thing in my life. But it gave me a perspective on the honor of the men and women who serve, and a respect for people's decisions, even though the politics stank around that time my son was in the Marine Corps. We had a draft dodger, Bill Clinton, as president when he volunteered, and then a fool, George W. Bush, who sent our country into a war and series of wars that continue today, 16 years, 15 years later. So the story did not end well for the country. And now we have Donald Trump as president. And we have Marine Corps generals serving along with other former military personnel or military personnel choosing to serve under this president. I'm not talking about the men and women in the military who have to serve no matter who's president or resign, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and so forth. I'm talking about people who were in the military and had honorable careers who have chosen to serve with him. Well, in the same way that we criticize Donald Trump very justly for many things, but in particular these days for not making a clear stand by name against the white supremacists, the Nazis, the KKK, naming them, and instead this horrible response he had to the murder of a wonderful young woman in Charlottesville, mowed down by a white nationalist terrorist who allegedly killed her with his car. And all Trump said is there's problems from many sides. You know, that's like going and seeing someone hanging from a tree from a lynching from a white mob and saying, well, you know, this reflects violence that's terrible, but it comes from many sides. No, it doesn't. It comes from a bunch of white racist thugs who lynched that black man. That's the problem. Well, the problem in Charlottesville was the white racist thugs, gun-toting thugs, because of the NRA, who's not only put guns in the hands of everyone in this country, but has fought for the right for open carry laws and now of long guns, rifles, military weapons, people dressed in full combat gear marching in our streets. Hello, that's what fascism looks like. That's what the decline of a civilization looks like, when you can't tell the difference between the armed militias and the authorities, and those lines are deliberately being blurred by people like Steve Bannon, who sits at the right hand of the fool we have in the White House. In that context, I just have this to say, and I'm sorry to say this. People like Kelly who are serving with this president are doing the same thing the president is doing by blurring the lines between who's responsible for the civil chaos that the white supremacists want to sow in our midst. The fact that Kelly has agreed to serve in a White House where Bannon is, the fact that President Trump blurs the line between who's responsible and who isn't responsible by general remarks, rather than specifically addressing the problem of white nationalism, racism, the Ku Klux Klan, people waving Nazi flags, not just Confederate flags, and can't even clearly draw the line there. Kelly and these other Marines and former generals and military people are dishonoring the U.S. military and the men and women who serve by serving with this president. In fact, anyone from civilian life who takes a job in this White House is dishonoring themselves and our country in the same way the president has dishonored our country by not drawing a clear, bright line between himself and the KKK and the Nazis and the neo-fascists and the white supremacists and this other horde of malignant, mutant degenerates who come burbling up like a full tank of sewage out of a system where the pumps have failed. I'm sorry to say this, but as someone who is a fan of the U.S. military, whose son served and who is so proud and had things like that piece I wrote, My Heart on the Line, read on air by Laura Bush one Christmas, whatever it was, 14 years ago, as one of the favorite things that she had read that year. Coming from that Republican background, not only is the Republican Party dishonored for a lifetime now because of its association with this president and this grim butt-kissing they've done in not distancing themselves, but now in the light of this insurrectionist, revolutionary, right-wing, fascist, terrorist movement unleashed in our midst of gun-carrying moron thugs, the president will not distance himself from them, and anyone who is still working in the White House by choice is a dishonorable man or woman, and I don't care how honorably they served in the U.S. military. Shame on you, Kelly. Shame on you, anyone who would trade the reputation of the U.S. military to serve this fool. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaefer.